From the world's youngest serial killer who murdered 3 infant children, to a 13-year-old who sexually assaults his victims before strangling them to death. These murder cases will leave you asking what's the worst thing a child can do. But first, let's look at what a 6-year-old is capable of. Number 10. Carl Mahan. We all know that a 6-year-old is too young to know anything about the dark world, but what if I told you that a 6-year-old kid can take away people's lives? That's right, at just 6 years old, Carl Newton Mahan took a life over a piece of scrap metal. It was a beautiful spring day in 1929 when Carl and his friend Cecil were scavenging for scrap iron in the small mining town of Paintsville, Kentucky. Carl was lucky to get a piece of iron which was then considered precious, but things would quickly turn deadly when Cecil snatched the metal from Carl's hand and hit him over the head with it. Enraged, Carl ran home, grabbed his father's shotgun and went back to confront Cecil. What happened next is truly shocking because Carl pulled the trigger and killed his former friend on the spot. Carl went down in the history books as the youngest known killer in the history of America. He was sentenced to 15 years in reform school for first-degree murder, but this was later overturned as he was issued with a court-ordered writ of prohibition setting him free. Number 9. Amarjit Sada. Well, perhaps we could forgive Carl Mahan based on being provoked, but how about this young Indian kid who murdered not only 1 but 3 innocent infant children? Amarjit Sada, popularly known as the youngest serial killer, was only 8 years old when he was charged with the murder of 3 infant children. And it's shocking that his victims included his blood sister and a cousin. Sada committed his first murder at the age of 7 years old. Unfortunately, his first 2 murders were covered up by his family, and this seems to have encouraged him to continue the murder spree. Sada would go ahead to commit his 3rd murder at the age of 8, where he took away the life of a 6-month-old called Khushbu and buried her in a nearby bush. It was then that his heinous crimes came to public notice. After being confronted, Sada admitted to the crime, leading police to where he had buried the child and describing how he had killed her with a rock. But this leaves you asking, what could drive an 8-year-old to commit such brutal acts? Well, an investigation into the case revealed that Sada was suffering from psychiatric disorders. He was placed in a remand home in a nearby town until he turned 18. Number 8. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate was just 14 years old when he made history as the youngest person in America to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His crime? The brutal murder of 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick. But did he really do it intentionally? Nobody knows. On the night of the murder, Tate's mother was babysitting the children while she prepared for her night shift as a Florida State Trooper. While she was napping, the kids were playing downstairs. But less than an hour later, Tate came to his mother with the horrifying news that Tiffany wasn't breathing. He claimed that he had accidentally killed her while practicing wrestling moves he had seen on TV. But the autopsy revealed something far more sinister. Tiffany had suffered a crushed skull, broken ribs, and a shredded liver that had been pushed through her ribcage. Tate was arrested and sentenced to life without parole. In 2004, Tate's conviction was overturned because his mental competency had not been evaluated before trial. He was a free man, but not for long. Just 1 year later, he was back in trouble with the law after committing an armed robbery on a pizza delivery worker. Number 7. Girl A. If you're from Japan, you probably remember the popular Nevada Tan meme that emerged in 2004, describing an 11-year-old girl who brutally murdered her classmate Satomi Mitarai. The police referred to the young Japanese schoolgirl who murdered Satomi as Girl A to protect her identity as a juvenile offender. The gruesome attack took place in June 2004 in an empty classroom at Okubo Elementary School in Sasebo during lunch hour, where Girl A used a paper cutter to slit Satomi's throat and arms. It's shocking that the motive behind the heinous act was nothing serious at all. The 2 girls had a quarrel on the internet where Satomi insulted Girl A's weight and called her offensive names, and the result was Girl A taking her colleague's life. Girl A was arrested and taken into custody where she confessed to the murder. She was sentenced to 4 years for involuntary commitment and sent to a reform institution due to the severity of the crime. This horrifying murder has since come to be known as Sasebo slashing. Number 6. Brenda Ann Spencer. What is the worst you can do on your bad days? Well, for Brenda Ann Spencer, it's taking people's lives, and she feels no sorrow about that. She was just 16 years old when she unleashed terror on Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California. The date was January 29, 1979, and Brenda, who was living with her father in extreme poverty, woke up in low moods. So she thought the best way to liven up her Monday would be to brandish a rifle and open fire from her home across the street. And sure enough, she did just that. The principal and custodian were left dead, while 8 children and a police officer were injured in the incident. It would take another 7 hours of a standoff with the police before Brenda finally surrendered, but her troubles were far from over. Despite pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon, Brenda was sentenced to 25 years to life. Number 5. Michael Hernandez. When you get obsessed with serial killers, the result is practicing what they do, and that's exactly what happened to 14-year-old Michael Hernandez. This young man used to follow up on the actions of serial killers, and so he wanted to do just what he watched. So on February 3, 2004, Hernandez lured 14-year-old Jamie Rodrigo Goff into a second-floor bathroom and brutally stabbed him 42 times to death. It all sounds like something you'd see in a movie, but this happened right at Southwood Middle School in Palmetto Bay, Florida. Hernandez was arrested for the murder of his classmate, and as the investigation continued, Hernandez was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and it was even found that he maintained a journal where he listed his potential victims, and surprisingly, Jamie's name was on that list. Eventually, the court found him competent and charged him with first-degree murder, resulting in a life sentence without parole. Number 4. John Venables and Robert Thompson. John Venables and Robert Thompson, both 10 years of age, murdered 2-year-old James Patrick Bulger. This would become the most brutal murder that shook Britain. It all started on February 12, 1993, when the 2 young boys abducted Bulger by leading him away from the shopping centre in Bootle, Merseyside. All of this happened while they were being recorded by a CCTV camera at the New Strand shopping centre. The boys would then torture Bulger for a few hours before taking his life. Police would use the CCTV footage as a lead to help them nab the young boys. They were sentenced to custody until adulthood, and in 2001 they were released with new identities to start fresh. And now it's time for today's best pick. Today's images feature a boy holding a pair of scissors, seemingly wanting to stab a pregnant woman, possibly his mother. This image is derived from the 1979 comic war drama film The Tin Drum. Let's find out more about this image with Number 3. Edmund Kemper. Edmund Emil Kemper III, popularly known as the Co-Ed Butcher, is probably not the type of a murderer you'd wish to meet. He was hungry for human blood and would even murder his closest relatives without a second thought. It's no wonder he went down in history as America's notorious serial killer and necrophile. At only 15, he brutally murdered his grandparents and was sentenced to a 5-year term as a juvenile, only to be released as an adult and unleash a killing spree on 6 female hitchhikers in Santa Cruz. But that's not all. He also murdered his own mother and one of her friends before presenting himself to the authorities. Kemper used his imposing size and genius-level IQ, estimated to be 140, to overpower his victims. In court, he pleaded not guilty because of insanity, but was ultimately found guilty of 8 counts of murder in November 1973. Shockingly, Edmund begged for the death penalty, but was instead sentenced to life imprisonment for the heinous murders he committed. Number 2. Craig Price. Forget about Edmund Kemper. Here is another American serial killer who, despite being young, terrorized the residents of Warwick, Rhode Island so much while evading arrest. It's no wonder he ended up earning the nickname of the Warwick Slasher. By the time Craig Price was 15 years old, he had committed several crimes in his home area, and the whole neighborhood was scared. Price would eventually get nabbed in 1989 when he was just 15. He was charged with 4 counts of murder. He committed his first murder in July 1987 at the age of 13 years old when he broke into a home 2 blocks from his own and stabbed 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer 58 times using a kitchen knife. It didn't take long, and in 2 years, Price committed his second murder, where he murdered 3 other neighbors, a woman and her 2 daughters. And even though Price was tried as a minor and was due for release in 2009, he has continuously been denied parole due to his violent acts while in prison. At one point in 2017, Price nearly murdered a fellow inmate, an incident that saw him slammed with another 21 years sentence. Number 1. Eric Smith. Eric Smith is another child on this list who committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. He was just 13 when he brutally murdered Derek Roby, a 4-year-old living relatively nearby in his Steuben County, New York neighborhood. On August 2, 1992, Smith lured Roby on his way to summer camp just a mere 5 blocks away into a small patch of woods in their town of Savona and strangled him. But Smith was not done. He went on to sexually assault the boy using a stick and dropped a huge rock onto his head. Roby met his untimely demise in what his parents described as his first time walking alone along the path. His mother was busy taking care of the other children at home when the incident happened. Smith was apprehended and pleaded guilty to the murder, but he was sentenced to life imprisonment. After being denied parole several times, he was eventually granted parole in 2022 when he was at the age of 42 on the grounds of having changed. Thanks for watching.